You're embarrassing me. Everyone's staring at us. Why'd you have to come here dressed like that? Can't you see this is my moment? Sarah, honey, I just wanted to see you graduate. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I've been dreaming of this day for years. You're nothing but a failure. A cleaning lady who embarrasses me. Please just disappear from my life forever. I don't want you here. The words hit like daggers through her heart. My mother ran away in tears, while everyone watched in stunned silence at my cruelty. 5 years later, I was a successful lawyer with everything I thought I wanted. But something felt empty, like my soul was missing something important. Miss Thompson? We're looking for Margaret Thompson. She's been missing for 3 months, and you're listed as her only emergency contact. Suddenly, I remembered her working endless hours through the night, sacrificing her health and happiness for my education, never once complaining. Counting every penny, saving every dollar for my future while she went without meals, wearing the same worn clothes year after year. She worked 3 jobs just to pay for my private school, coming home exhausted but always asking about my day with genuine love. Studying at night after work, preparing for something I never understood, her eyes red from exhaustion but determination never wavering. The day I graduated should have been our proudest moment together, celebrating years of sacrifice and hard work finally paying off. Instead, I crushed the woman who made it all possible, destroying her heart with words I could never take back or forget. Now she was missing, and I was finally asking the right questions, wondering if I'd lost her forever because of my ungrateful cruelty. But I didn't know my mother was hiding a secret that would change everything I believed about success, sacrifice, and unconditional love. A secret that would make me question everything I thought I knew about sacrifice, love, and what it truly means to be successful. About unconditional love, about what success really means, and about the incredible price some mothers pay for their children's dreams. When I finally found the truth about who my mother really was, it completely shattered everything I believed about our lives. The woman I called a failure, the woman I rejected and humiliated, was actually someone I never could have imagined in my worst nightmares. But would my desperate apology be enough to heal the devastating wounds I created? Could she ever forgive the daughter who broke her heart? This is the story of how I learned that love never gives up, even when we don't deserve it, and how grace can heal the deepest wounds. Before we continue this incredible journey together, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if it touched your heart, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories that remind us what truly matters in life. It all started 20 years ago when I was just 7 years old. My mother Margaret was only 32 then, a young widow trying to rebuild our shattered world after my father's sudden death in a car accident. I remember her holding me close, promising that everything would be okay, even though I could see the fear in her eyes. She was so young, so scared, but determined to be strong for me. Our small apartment felt like the safest place in the world when she held me, but I could sense the weight of responsibility crushing her shoulders. She never let me see her cry, but sometimes I would find damp tissues in the trash, and I knew she was struggling more than she ever let on. "Mommy, why can't we have pretty things like Jessica's family?" I asked one evening, looking around our tiny apartment with its secondhand furniture and peeling wallpaper. Jessica was my classmate whose family lived in a big house with a swimming pool, and I couldn't understand why we were so different from them. I wanted the toys she had, the clothes she wore, the big birthday parties with fancy decorations. My mother stopped washing dishes, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the sink. I didn't understand then why such a simple question could cause her so much pain. My mother knelt down to my level, her hands still wet from washing dishes, droplets falling onto the worn linoleum floor. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "pretty things don't make a family beautiful. Love does. And I promise you, one day you'll have everything you dream of and more. I'll make sure of it, no matter what it takes, no matter how hard I have to work." Her voice was filled with such fierce determination that I believed her completely. She pulled me into her arms, and I could smell the faint scent of cleaning supplies on her clothes, mixed with her gentle perfume. What I didn't understand then was the crushing weight of that promise. Every morning at 5 a.m., while the world was still dark and silent, she would leave for her first job at the hospital cafeteria, moving like a ghost through our apartment so she wouldn't wake me. She worked there until noon, serving food to doctors and nurses who barely acknowledged her existence, then rushed across town to her second job cleaning offices downtown. Her day ended at the grocery store, stocking shelves until midnight, her feet swollen and aching by the time she dragged herself home. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, just to keep us afloat. I remember watching her count and recount our money every Sunday night, her fingers moving through crumpled bills and scattered coins like she was performing some sacred ritual. Rent, groceries, Sarah's school supplies. She would whisper to herself, organizing everything into little piles, calculating and recalculating with the intensity of a mathematician solving the world's most important equation. Sometimes she would stare at the numbers for long minutes, and I could see her making impossible decisions about what we could afford and what we'd have to do without. She always chose my needs over hers, every single time. At school, I started noticing the differences more and more each day, and they stung like tiny needles in my heart. Other kids had brand new backpacks that smelled like fresh leather, the latest sneakers that lit up when they walked, fancy lunchboxes filled with snacks I'd only seen in commercials. They talked about family vacations to Disney World, swimming lessons, piano classes, things that seemed as impossible to me as flying to the moon. I began feeling embarrassed when they asked about my father or why my mother couldn't come to school events during the day like their perfectly dressed, always available mothers could. But there was something mysterious about my mother during those years that I couldn't quite understand. After I went to bed, she would sit at our rickety kitchen table with these massive, thick books that looked nothing like the romance novels other mothers read. Medical textbooks, anatomy guides, pharmacology manuals. She would study them until the early hours of the morning, her eyes red with exhaustion but blazing with determination. When I asked her about them, she would just smile mysteriously and say, "Mommy's learning new things to help people, sweetheart. Knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take away from you." "Mommy, are you okay?" I asked one night when I found her asleep at the table, her head resting on an open anatomy book, drool pooling on a diagram of the human heart. She looked so small, so fragile, so completely exhausted that for the first time I wondered if taking care of me was slowly killing her. When she woke up, startled and disoriented, she immediately pulled me into her lap, her arms wrapping around me like I was the most precious thing in the universe. "I'm perfect, baby girl," she whispered into my hair. "Everything I do, every sacrifice I make, is because I love you more than my own life." Every single night, no matter how bone-deep exhausted she was, no matter how early she had to wake up the next morning, she would tuck me in a bed and tell me the most amazing stories. Stories about princesses who became doctors and saved entire kingdoms, about girls who grew up to be lawyers and fought for justice, about women who started with nothing and built empires through sheer determination and hard work. "You can be anything you want, Sarah," she would whisper, her voice filled with absolute conviction as she stroked my hair. "Promise me you'll never settle for less than your wildest dreams." Looking back now, with a wisdom that only comes from devastating loss and crushing regret, I realize those were the happiest, most love-filled years of my entire life, even though we had so little money that we counted pennies for groceries. My mother's love filled every corner of our tiny apartment, warmer than any expensive heating system, brighter than any crystal chandelier. Her dreams for my future were bigger and more beautiful than any mansion, more valuable than any trust fund. But I was too young, too naive, too focused on what we didn't have to understand the incredible sacrifice behind every smile, every promise, every tired but loving goodnight kiss. By the time I turned 15, I started feeling something I had never experienced before in my life, deep, burning shame about my mother and everything she represented. Westfield Academy was filled with children whose parents were doctors, lawyers, successful business owners who drove luxury cars and lived in mansions with swimming pools. They talked casually about family vacations to Europe, designer clothes that cost more than we spent on groceries in months, and luxury cars that were replaced every few years. Standing among them in my perfectly pressed uniform, paid for with my mother's blood and sweat, I began to feel embarrassed about our small apartment with its peeling wallpaper, our second-hand furniture that creaked, and most painfully, about my hard-working mother who scrubbed floors to give me opportunities one was now taking for granted. My mother was paying for this expensive education through incredible sacrifice that I was too selfish to understand at the time. The tuition at Westfield Academy was astronomical, more than most families earned in an entire year, but somehow she was making it possible through sheer determination. To make it work, she had taken on additional cleaning jobs, working in office buildings after her hospital shift ended, scrubbing floors and cleaning bathrooms throughout the night while I slept peacefully. She worked 7 days a week, her hands raw from harsh chemicals and her back aching from constant physical labor that was slowly destroying her body. She barely slept 4 hours a night, pushing herself beyond human limits, but she never complained about the price she was paying for my opportunities. When my new classmates asked about my family background, I started lying without hesitation, each deception coming easier than the last. "What does your mom do for work?" Amanda asked during lunch, her designer purse casually placed on the table like it was nothing, even though it probably cost more than my mother made in months. My heart raced and palms started sweating as I searched desperately for an answer that wouldn't destroy my carefully crafted image. "She works in healthcare," I said smoothly, which was technically true since she worked in the hospital cafeteria serving food. But I said it in a way that implied she was a doctor or a nurse, something prestigious and respectable that would fit in with their world. The lie came so easily that it scared me, but the relief I felt at maintaining my facade was absolutely intoxicating. My mother wasn't blind to the dramatic changes that were happening in me and our relationship that had once been so close. She noticed how I spoke differently now, using phrases and mannerisms I'd picked up from my wealthy classmates, adopting their entitled attitudes. She saw how I became visibly uncomfortable when she asked about school, how I avoided talking about my friends or bringing them up in conversation. I could see the growing hurt in her tired eyes when I would stiffen and pull away during her attempts to hug me, when I'd abruptly change the subject if she mentioned visiting my school or meeting my teachers. But instead of confronting me directly about my increasingly cruel behavior, she just continued working harder, taking on more hours, sacrificing even more of herself to keep me in that school where I was learning to be ashamed of her. The breaking point came when the school announced their annual parent-teacher conference night, an event that would expose everything I had been hiding. "I'm so excited to finally meet your teachers and see your classroom," my mother said, her tired face lighting up with genuine joy and anticipation. The thought of her walking into that prestigious school, surrounded by wealthy, sophisticated parents in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry, filled me with absolute dread. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't come this time," I said carefully, watching her smile fade instantly. "Why not, sweetheart?" "I've been looking forward to this for weeks," she asked, confusion and hurt already evident in her voice. "Because you don't fit in with the other parents. They're different from us. They're successful, educated, wealthy." The words came out harsher and more cruel than I intended, but once spoken, I couldn't take them back. The silence that followed my cruel words was absolutely devastating to witness, like watching someone's heartbreak in real time. I watched my mother's face completely crumble as she processed the devastating message I had just delivered to the woman who loved me more than life itself. She didn't argue with me, didn't defend herself, didn't point out all the incredible ways she had been successful in raising me alone while working multiple jobs and sacrificing everything for my future. She didn't remind me of the countless nights she had stayed up helping me with homework, the meals she had skipped so I could eat, the dreams she had abandoned so mine could come true. She just sat there, absorbing the crushing blow with the grace of a saint. "Of course, honey," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible and filled with pain. "I understand completely. I don't want to embarrass you. but I could see the tears she was desperately fighting back. Despite the devastating emotional pain I had caused her, my mother continued sacrificing everything for my education without a single word of complaint. She kept working her multiple jobs, kept paying that enormous tuition that was slowly killing her, kept believing in my future, even as I was systematically destroying our relationship. The physical and emotional exhaustion was written all over her face. Her hands were constantly damaged and bleeding from cleaning chemicals. Her back was permanently bent from years of labor, but she never complained. She never asked me to appreciate what she was doing, never pointed out how much she was giving up for my opportunities, never demanded gratitude for her endless sacrifices. She just kept working, kept sacrificing, kept loving me unconditionally, even as I was learning to be ashamed of everything she represented. After that devastating night, I became an expert at avoiding any real emotional connection with her, keeping our interactions superficial and brief to protect my false identity. When she tried to ask about my day at school, I gave short, dismissive answers that shut down conversation. When she suggested we spend time together like we used to when I was younger, I claimed I was too busy with homework or meeting friends from school. I was protecting my fake identity by systematically pushing away the one person who loved me most in this world. The easy intimacy and unconditional love we once shared was being replaced by polite distance and careful interactions, and I could see her trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less likely to embarrass me. But instead of feeling relief, I felt a growing emptiness I couldn't explain. She responded to my rejection and cruelty by working even harder than before, if such a thing was humanly possible. Weekend shifts, holiday hours, overtime, whenever available, anything that would help pay for my expensive education and the opportunities it represented. Her sacrifice was becoming more obvious and heartbreaking every single day. Her exhaustion was deeper. Her hands were more damaged and scarred from chemicals. Her back was more bent and painful from constant physical labor. But she never complained about the pain, never asked for gratitude or recognition, never pointed out the enormous cost of my opportunities. She absorbed my coldness and casual cruelty with grace I didn't deserve, somehow still managing to have a hot dinner ready for me every night and help me with homework whenever I needed it, treating me like the precious daughter I had once been. The emotional gap between us widened dramatically with each passing day, and I was the one actively creating that painful distance through my choices and actions. Every time she tried to bridge the growing chasm between us with love, kindness, or genuine interest in my life, I found a new way to push her further away. I was building an impenetrable wall between us, brick by brick, choosing my fake friends and false identity over the woman who had sacrificed absolutely everything for me. I told myself it was temporary, that I would repair our precious relationship later when I was successful and established. But with every cold shoulder I gave her, every dismissive comment I made, every moment I chose my shame over her unconditional love, I was destroying something beautiful and irreplaceable that might be impossible to rebuild once it was completely broken. By the time I reached college, the distance between my mother and me had become a vast canyon. I was attending Harvard Law School, the most prestigious law program in the country, and once again my mother was somehow making the impossible happen. The tuition and living expenses were astronomical, but she never let me worry about money. I was living in a beautiful dormitory, eating at expensive restaurants with classmates, buying textbooks that cost hundreds of dollars each, all while my mother worked herself to the bone. I had convinced myself that once I became a successful lawyer, I would make it all worth her sacrifice. It was at Harvard that I met Amanda Foster, the daughter of a wealthy banking family who became my closest friend and worst influence. Amanda lived in a world of inherited wealth and casual privilege that I desperately wanted to claim. Her family owned multiple homes, traveled internationally, and treated expensive items like they were disposable. She had never worked a day in her life, never worried about money, never questioned her opportunities. Being around Amanda made me even more ashamed of my humble origins and my mother's working-class background. I began to see my mother's sacrifices not as acts of love, but as embarrassing reminders of the poverty I was trying to escape. The lies about my family became more elaborate as I spent time with Amanda and her wealthy friends. When they asked about my background, I created a fictional version of my life that would fit their privileged world. I told them my mother was a hospital administrator, my father had been a successful businessman before his death, and that I came from a comfortable middle-class family. Every detail was crafted to suggest respectability without claiming too much wealth. The lies came so naturally that I almost believed them myself, and the relief I felt at being accepted was intoxicating. But each lie took me further from the truth of who I really was. Meanwhile, my mother was working harder than ever to support my expensive education. She had taken on even more cleaning contracts, working at restaurants, office buildings, and private homes throughout the week. Her hands were constantly raw from chemicals, her back ached from physical labor, and she rarely slept more than 3 hours a night. But she never complained, never asked me to appreciate her sacrifices, never pointed out how much she was giving up. She would call me once a week, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, but she always asked about my studies with genuine interest and pride. I began to dread those calls because they reminded me of everything I was trying to forget. Our phone conversations became shorter and more superficial with each passing month. When she would ask about my friends, my classes, or my life at Harvard, I gave brief, dismissive answers that discouraged further questions. When she would tell me about her work or her life back home, I would barely listen, thinking about more important things like my upcoming exams or plans with Amanda. I could hear the sadness in her voice when I would cut our conversations short, claiming I had studying to do or friends to meet. The truth was that talking to her made me feel guilty about the lies I was living, and it was easier to avoid the discomfort by pushing her away even further. What I didn't know was that one of my mother's new cleaning contracts was at Harvard University itself. She was working the night shift in various buildings across campus, including the law school where I spent my days. While I sat in prestigious classrooms discussing legal theory with my privileged classmates, my mother was scrubbing those same floors after hours, emptying trash cans, and cleaning bathrooms. She had never told me about this job because she knew it would embarrass me, just like everything else about her life had become a source of shame for me. She was literally working in the shadows of my education, invisible and unacknowledged. I was completely unaware that my mother was working just floors below where I studied every day. I walked through those hallways with Amanda and our friends, complaining about professors, discussing our future careers as successful lawyers, and planning expensive weekend trips. I felt like I belonged in this world of privilege and opportunity, like I had finally found where I was meant to be. The guilt about my lies and my treatment of my mother was buried so deep that I rarely thought about it anymore. I had convinced myself that I was protecting both of us by keeping our worlds separate. Then one evening, as I was leaving the library with Amanda, fate intervened in the cruelest possible way. I was laughing at something Amanda had said when I noticed a familiar figure in a cleaning uniform at the end of the hallway. My blood turned to ice as I realized it was my mother, mopping the floors of my prestigious law school. She looked up at that exact moment, and our eyes met across the hallway. I saw the shock and fear in her expression as she realized I had discovered her secret. For a moment, neither of us moved, both frozen by the horrible coincidence that had exposed everything. What I did next will haunt me for the rest of my life. Instead of running to her, instead of acknowledging the woman who was sacrificing everything for my education, I turned away. I pretended I didn't see her, didn't know my entire existence to her endless love and sacrifice. I laughed louder at Amanda's joke, walked faster toward the exit, and left my mother standing there with her mop and bucket, watching her daughter choose strangers over the woman who loved her most. I could feel her eyes following me as I walked away, could sense her heartbreak even from across that long hallway, but I was too much a coward to turn around. When I went home for winter break, the tension between us was unbearable. She never mentioned seeing me at Harvard, never brought up her job at the university, never asked why I had pretended not to know her. But I could see the pain in her eyes, The knowledge that her daughter was ashamed of her had settled into her heart like a permanent wound. Our conversations were stilted and awkward, filled with long silences and careful words. I could feel her trying to bridge the gap between us, but I was too proud and too scared to meet her halfway. Instead, I counted the days until I could return to my fake life at school, where I could pretend to be someone I wasn't. Graduation day had finally arrived after 4 grueling years of law school. I stood in my cap and gown among my classmates, feeling proud of what I had accomplished, but completely disconnected from the woman who had made it all possible. Harvard Law School's commencement ceremony was being held on a beautiful spring morning, with hundreds of families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. I looked around at all the proud parents taking photos, giving hugs, and sharing in their children's success. But I had made a decision that would haunt me forever. I hadn't invited my mother to attend. I told myself it was better this way, that she wouldn't fit in with the other parents, that it would be awkward and embarrassing for both of us. Amanda was surrounded by her perfect family, her father in his expensive suit, her mother dripping with diamonds, both of them radiating the confidence that comes with generational wealth. They had flown in on their private jet, staying at the most exclusive hotel in Boston, and planned elaborate celebration dinners at restaurants I could never afford. Watching them together made me feel even more ashamed of my own background. Amanda's parents spoke eloquently about their daughter's future at their family's law firm, about the doors that would open for her, about the legacy she would continue. I invented excuses for why my family couldn't attend, claiming my mother was too busy with important work commitments to make the trip. But my mother had come anyway. Despite not being invited, despite my cruel rejection, despite years of growing distance between us, she had somehow found a way to be there for my graduation day. She stood outside the ceremony gates wearing her best dress, the same simple blue outfit she had worn to my high school graduation years earlier, carefully cleaned and pressed for this special occasion. In her hands, she held a small bouquet of flowers that she had probably saved for weeks to afford. Her face was filled with pride and hope as she watched the crowds of families entering the ceremony. She had traveled for hours by bus because she couldn't afford a plane ticket, all for the chance to see her daughter graduate from Harvard Law School. As Amanda and I walked toward the ceremony entrance with her parents, I was completely unaware that my mother was waiting nearby. I was laughing at Amanda's story about her summer plans in Europe, feeling sophisticated and successful, believing I had finally found where I belonged. Amanda was making cruel comments about some of the less fortunate families she had noticed, mocking their clothes and accents with the casual cruelty that came so naturally to her privileged world. I found myself laughing along, not realizing that I was essentially mocking people like my own mother. The irony was devastating, but I was too blinded by my desire to fit in to see how far I had fallen from the values my mother had tried to teach me. Then I saw her. My mother was walking toward me with tentative steps, her face lighting up with joy and relief when she spotted me in the crowd. "Sarah," she called out, her voice filled with pride and love. "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." She held out the small bouquet of flowers, her hands trembling slightly with emotion. For a moment, I felt a rush of love and gratitude seeing her there, remembering all the sacrifices she had made to get me to this moment. But then I noticed Amanda and her parents watching, their expressions shifting from curiosity to barely concealed disdain as they took in my mother's simple appearance and working-class manner of speaking. The shame and panic that washed over me in that moment was overwhelming. Instead of embracing the woman who had sacrificed everything for this day, I felt nothing but mortification that she was there, that Amanda and her family were seeing her, that my carefully constructed lies were about to be exposed. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I told you not to come." My mother's face fell, the joy draining from her expression as she realized she wasn't welcome. "I just wanted to see you graduate, honey. I've been dreaming of this day for years." But I was too consumed by my own selfish embarrassment to hear the love in her voice or see the pain I was causing. What happened next was the most shameful moment of my entire life. Standing there in front of hundreds of families celebrating their children's achievements, surrounded by my wealthy classmates and their judgmental parents, I said the words that would destroy both our hearts forever. "You're embarrassing me," I shouted, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You're nothing but a failure. A cleaning lady who doesn't belong here. Please just disappear from my life." The words came out with a venom and cruelty that shocked even me, but I couldn't stop myself. I was so desperate to protect my false identity, so terrified of being exposed as a fraud, that I was willing to destroy the most important relationship in my life. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother stood there in shock, the bouquet of flowers falling from her trembling hands and scattering on the ground at her feet. Her face crumpled with pain so profound that it was physically painful to witness. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide her tears from the crowd of strangers who had witnessed her public humiliation. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice broken and barely audible. "I'm so sorry." She wasn't apologizing for coming to my graduation. She was apologizing for existing, for being the kind of mother who embarrassed her successful daughter, for not being good enough to share in this moment she had made possible through years of sacrifice. Without another word, my mother turned and ran. She pushed through the crowd of shocked graduation attendees, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs that could be heard even from a distance. I watched her disappear into the sea of people, her small figure becoming smaller and smaller until I couldn't see her anymore. The other parents and students who had witnessed my cruel outburst stared at me with expressions of disbelief and disgust. I had just publicly humiliated the woman who had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed her health, and given up her dreams so that I could stand there in that cap and gown. And I had done it to protect a lie that wasn't worth protecting. As the crowd slowly dispersed and people turned away from the ugly scene I had created, I stood there alone with the scattered flowers at my feet. Amanda and her parents had quietly moved away, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. Even they, with all their casual cruelty and entitled attitudes, were shocked by what I had done to my own mother. The graduation ceremony continued around me, but I felt completely disconnected from the celebration. I had achieved everything I thought I wanted: a Harvard law degree, acceptance into Amanda's wealthy world, freedom from my embarrassing past. But standing there in the aftermath of my cruelty, I felt nothing but emptiness. I had won everything and lost the only thing that truly mattered. After that devastating day at my graduation, my mother made a decision that would change both our lives forever. She couldn't bear to stay in the town where she had raised me, where every corner held memories of the daughter who had rejected her so cruelly. The pain of my public humiliation was too much to endure in a place where people might recognize her as the woman whose own child had called her a failure. She quietly began packing her few belongings, preparing to leave the only home she had known for 25 years. Her hands shook as she folded the simple clothes she had worn to work so many jobs, as she wrapped the few family photos we had taken when I was young and still loved her openly. On her final night in our apartment, she sat at the same kitchen table where she had helped me with homework for so many years and wrote me a letter. Her handwriting was shaky, tears falling onto the paper as she struggled to find words that could express a lifetime of love despite the pain I had caused her. She wrote about the pride she felt watching me grow up, about the dreams she had for my future, about how every sacrifice had been worth it just to see me succeed. She told me she was leaving not out of anger, but out of love. She didn't want to be a source of embarrassment anymore. She forgave me for my cruelty and asked only that I use my education to help others and find happiness. She left the letter on our kitchen table, the same table where she had counted pennies to pay for my education, the same table where she had studied late into the night while I slept. She took only a small suitcase with her most essential belongings, leaving behind the furniture we had collected over the years, the books she had studied, even the photos of me from happier times. She walked out of that apartment in the early morning hours, before the sun had risen, carrying nothing but her broken heart and her unconditional love for the daughter who had destroyed her. She didn't leave a forwarding address, didn't tell anyone where she was going. She simply disappeared from my life as I had demanded. Meanwhile, I was starting my new life as a successful lawyer, finally achieving everything I thought I had wanted. I had landed a position at one of the most prestigious law firms in Boston, working alongside the children of wealthy families who had connections and influence. My salary was more money than my mother and I had ever dreamed of having, enough to afford a luxury apartment, expensive clothes, and all the trappings of success. I threw myself into my work with single-minded determination, convincing myself that this was what all her sacrifices had been for. I told myself that I was finally living up to the potential she had seen in me, that my success would somehow justify the pain I had caused. But success felt hollow without anyone to share it with. My expensive apartment was beautiful but cold, filled with designer furniture but empty of love or warmth. I had everything I thought I wanted: money, prestige, respect from my colleagues, acceptance in the wealthy circles I had so desperately wanted to join. Yet every evening when I came home to my perfect life, I felt an emptiness that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. I found myself thinking about my mother more often than I wanted to admit, wondering where she was, whether she was safe, whether she ever thought about me. But my pride prevented me from reaching out, from admitting that I had made a terrible mistake. I filled my time with work and social events, surrounding myself with colleagues and clients who valued success above all else. I dated successful men who took me to expensive restaurants and exclusive parties, but none of these relationships felt real or meaningful. They were all attracted to the successful lawyer I had become, not the person I really was underneath the designer clothes and confident facade. I had built my entire identity around rejecting my past, but in doing so, I had lost touch with everything that had once made me human. The values my mother had tried to teach me, kindness, compassion, gratitude, had been buried under layers of ambition and shame. Work became my escape from the growing emptiness in my personal life. I took on more cases than anyone else, working 16-hour days and weekends, building a reputation as one of the most dedicated young lawyers in the firm. My colleagues respected my work ethic, my clients trusted my expertise, and my bosses praised my commitment to success. But deep down, I knew I was running from something I couldn't name. Every achievement felt meaningless because there was no one who truly mattered to share it with. The woman who had sacrificed everything for my success was gone, and I had no one to blame but myself. Sometimes, in quiet moments when I couldn't distract myself with work or social obligations, I would look at the few family photos I had kept from my childhood. Pictures of my mother and me when I was young, when our love was simple and pure, when I looked at her like she was the most important person in my world. I could barely recognize the happy child in those photos, or the loving mother who had given up everything for her daughter's dreams. Those moments of reflection were painful but necessary, reminding me of what I had lost and what I had become. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to try to find her and apologize. Years passed in this pattern of professional success and personal emptiness. I received awards, promotions, recognition for my legal work, but each achievement felt more hollow than the last. Colleagues envied my career trajectory, clients sought out my services, and I was invited to all the right social events. From the outside, my life looked perfect. The successful daughter who had made something of herself, who had risen above her humble beginnings to achieve the American dream. But I knew the truth about what I had sacrificed to get there, and the knowledge ate away at me like a slow poison. The hardest times were holidays and special occasions when families came together to celebrate. I would spend Christmas alone in my expensive apartment, surrounded by luxury, but feeling more isolated than ever. I thought about my mother constantly during these times, wondering if she was alone too, if she was safe, if she ever missed the daughter who had treated her so cruelly. I had achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I had lost the only person whose love had been real and unconditional. I was successful, wealthy, and respected, but I was also completely and utterly alone, living with the consequences of choosing pride over love, ambition over family, and lies over truth. 5 years had passed since that terrible graduation day when I destroyed my relationship with my mother. I was now a successful partner in my law firm, living the life I thought I had always wanted. Then my phone rang on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Miss Thompson? This is Dr. Patricia Collins from Riverside General Hospital. We have your mother, Margaret Thompson. Here's a patient. She's been asking for you. My blood turned to ice. After all these years of silence, my mother was in a hospital, and I was listed as her emergency contact. The guilt and fear that washed over me was overwhelming. What if something serious had happened to her? I dropped everything and drove to my hometown as fast as my car could take me, my heart racing with panic and regret. During that long drive, I was forced to confront all the feelings I had buried for years. What if she was seriously ill? What if she was dying, and the last words between us had been my cruel rejection? I realized that despite all my success, despite all the walls I had built around my heart, I still loved her desperately. The thought of losing her forever, of never having the chance to apologize for what I had done, filled me with a terror I had never experienced. I drove through the night, praying to a God I rarely spoke to that I wouldn't be too late. When I arrived at Riverside General Hospital, I rushed to the reception desk, my hands shaking as I asked about my mother. Margaret Thompson, I said breathlessly. I'm her daughter. How is she? The receptionist looked at me with confusion and checked her computer system. I'm sorry, but we don't have any patient by that name currently admitted, she said. Are you sure you have the right hospital? My heart sank. Had something happened to her? Had she been transferred? Had I received a false call? The receptionist suggested I check with other hospitals in the area, but after calling every medical facility within 50 miles, I found no record of my mother anywhere. Desperate and confused, I began searching my hometown for any trace of my mother. I went to our old apartment building, but the current tenants had never heard of Margaret Thompson. I visited the hospital cafeteria where she used to work, but they told me she had quit years ago without leaving a forwarding address. I checked with the cleaning company she had worked for, but they had no current contact information. It was as if my mother had completely vanished from the place where she had spent most of her life. With each dead end, my panic grew stronger. Where was the woman who had raised me? What had happened to her after I drove her away? At a small diner where my mother used to take me for special occasions when I was young, I spoke with an elderly waitress who remembered us. Oh, Margaret Thompson, she said sadly. Such a sweet woman. She used to come in here sometimes, always asking about you, wondering how you were doing at that fancy school. But I haven't seen her in maybe 3 years now. Someone said she moved away after something happened with her daughter. The shame in the woman's voice told me that word of my graduation day, cruelty, had spread through our small town. Even strangers knew what I had done to my mother, and they judged me for it. I spent the next several days knocking on doors, speaking with former neighbors, and anyone who might have known my mother. The stories I heard broke my heart in ways I never expected. People told me about how my mother used to volunteer at the local food bank during her rare free time, how she would help elderly neighbors with their groceries, how she always spoke proudly of her daughter who was going to be a lawyer. They remembered her as a kind, hard-working woman who never complained about her struggles. But they also remembered the day she left town, how broken she seemed, how she told people she needed to start fresh somewhere else. The landlord of our old apartment building had the most information. She paid her rent 3 months in advance before she left, he told me. Said she wanted to make sure everything was settled properly. She seemed like she was in pain, not physical pain, but emotional. She didn't say where she was going, just that she needed to be somewhere new. He handed me a small box that my mother had left behind. She said if anyone came looking for her, especially her daughter, I should give them this. Inside the box were some of my childhood photos, my old report cards that she had saved, and a few letters I had written her from college before I started pushing her away. Just as I was losing hope of ever finding a lead, I met Dr. James Mitchell at the local medical clinic. He was a distinguished older physician who seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have known him from. When I mentioned my mother's name, his expression changed dramatically. Margaret Thompson, he said softly. I've been wondering what happened to her. She used to help out here at the clinic sometimes. There was something in his voice, a depth of knowledge and concern that suggested he knew much more about my mother than he was initially letting on. I pressed him for more information. Dr. Mitchell studied my face carefully, as if trying to decide how much to tell me. Your mother is a remarkable woman, he said finally. More remarkable than you probably know. But I think before I tell you what I know about where she might be, there are some things about her that you need to understand first. He paused, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and something that looked almost like disappointment. Tell me, what do you know about your mother's background? Her education? Her life before you were born? His questions confused me. I thought I knew everything about my mother. She was a hard-working cleaning lady who had sacrificed everything for my education. I'm afraid there's a great deal about your mother that she never told you, Dr. Mitchell said, his voice heavy with significance. Things that might change everything you thought you knew about her, about the sacrifices she made, about why she chose the life she did. He leaned forward in his chair, his expression growing more serious. Your mother, Margaret Thompson, wasn't always a cleaning lady. In fact, before you were born, before your father died, she was one of the most brilliant physicians I've ever known. And what she gave up to raise you, well, that's a story that might be difficult for you to hear, but one you desperately need to know. Dr. Mitchell stood up and walked to his office wall, pointing to a framed diploma from Harvard Medical School. Next to it was an old photograph of graduating medical students from 1995. Do you see that young woman in the front row? He asked, pointing to a brilliant smile graduate. That's your mother, Dr. Margaret Thompson, one of the most promising pediatric residents Harvard had ever seen. I stared at the photo in complete shock, unable to reconcile the image of the confident young doctor with the tired cleaning lady I had grown up knowing. That's impossible, I whispered, but even as I said it, I could see the resemblance. My mother had been a Harvard-trained physician, just like me. Your mother graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Medical School, Dr. Mitchell continued, his voice filled with respect and admiration. She specialized in pediatric medicine and was considered a prodigy in her field. She could have had her pick of prestigious positions at any major hospital in the country. After medical school, she completed her residency at Boston Children's Hospital, where she was known for her incredible diagnostic skills and her compassionate care with young patients. She was on track to become one of the leading pediatric specialists in the nation. Then your father died in that car accident, and everything changed. She gave up her entire medical career to raise you. When your father died, your mother faced an impossible choice, Dr. Mitchell explained, his voice heavy with emotion. She could continue her demanding medical career, working long hours and building her reputation, but that would mean leaving you with babysitters and daycare centers most of the time. Or she could give up everything she had worked for and dedicate herself completely to raising you. She chose you, Sarah. She walked away from a career that had taken her 8 years of intensive study and training. She gave up a salary that would have made your family wealthy, gave up the prestige and respect she had earned. Also, she could be the mother she believed you needed. But why did she become a cleaning lady? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mitchell's expression grew even more tender. Because cleaning jobs offered flexible hours that allowed her to be home when you needed her. She could work nights while you slept, early mornings before you woke up, weekends while you played. It was the only way she could support you financially while still being present for every important moment of your childhood. She chose jobs that the world considers menial not because she wasn't capable of more, but because they allowed her to prioritize being your mother above everything else. Every night while you did homework, she was there to help you. Every school event, every doctor's appointment, every moment you needed her, she was available. Those medical textbooks you saw her studying late at night, Dr. Mitchell continued, she was keeping up with advances in medicine, maintaining her knowledge even though she wasn't practicing. She never gave up hope that someday, when you were grown and independent, she might be able to return to helping people in some capacity. She used to volunteer here at our free clinic occasionally, providing medical care to families who couldn't afford proper health care. She never stopped being a doctor in her heart, even when the world only saw her as a cleaning lady. She was using her medical expertise to help the community's most vulnerable families, all while working multiple jobs to pay for your education. The most heartbreaking part, Dr. Mitchell said, his voice cracking slightly, is that she was planning to tell you the truth when you graduated from law school. She had been saving money not just for your education, but to potentially return to medicine herself. She thought that once you had achieved your dreams, you might be proud to learn that your mother was also a professional, that she had made these sacrifices by choice, not because she was incapable of more. She wanted to surprise you at your graduation with the truth about her background, about the career she had given up for you. Instead, he paused, unable to finish the sentence, but we both knew what had happened instead. I had publicly humiliated her before she could reveal her secret. The weight of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my mother, about the sacrifices she had made, was completely wrong. She hadn't been a failure. She had been more successful than I had ever dreamed of becoming. She hadn't been uneducated. She had the same degree from the same prestigious university where I had studied. She hadn't been cleaning toilets because she wasn't smart enough for better work. She had been cleaning toilets because she loved me enough to give up a brilliant medical career so she could be the mother she thought I deserved. And I had called her a failure in front of hundreds of people, had been ashamed of the woman who had sacrificed more than I could have ever imagined. "There's more you should know," Dr. Mitchell said gently. "Your mother wasn't just keeping her medical skills sharp for herself. For the past 10 years, she's been secretly using the money she saved from her multiple jobs to fund a free medical clinic in the poorest part of town. She's been providing health care to families who can't afford insurance, using her own savings to buy medical supplies and equipment. She never wanted recognition or credit. She just wanted to help people who were struggling the way you too had struggled when you were young. She's been a doctor to hundreds of families who had nowhere else to turn, all while working as a cleaning lady to pay for your expensive education." Dr. Mitchell opened a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder filled with thank you letters, medical records, and photographs. "These are just some of the families your mother has helped over the years," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "Children whose lives she saved with early diagnosis, families she helped navigate serious medical crises, elderly patients she treated with dignity and compassion when no one else would see them. She's been practicing medicine this entire time, just not in the way the world typically recognizes. She's been a healer, a caregiver, a physician in the truest sense of the word, using her gifts to serve the most vulnerable members of our community while simultaneously working multiple menial jobs to ensure you could have every opportunity she never had." I sat there in complete devastation, finally understanding the magnitude of what my mother had done for me and the unspeakable cruelty of what I had done to her. She hadn't just sacrificed her comfort, her health, or her free time. She had sacrificed a brilliant career, financial security, professional recognition, and her own dreams so that I could pursue mine. And instead of being grateful, instead of recognizing her strength and love, I had been ashamed of her. I had seen her service jobs as proof of her failure rather than evidence of her incredible love. I had judged her for the very sacrifices she had made to ensure my success. The woman I had called a failure was actually a hero, and I was the failure, a failure as a daughter, as a human being, as someone worthy of such extraordinary love. "There's even more you need to know about your mother's secret life," Dr. Mitchell said, pulling out another thick folder from his file cabinet with reverent care. "The free clinic she's been funding? It's not just a small operation run out of someone's basement. Over the past decade, your mother has quietly created one of the most comprehensive healthcare networks for low-income families in this entire region. She's been using every penny she could save from her multiple jobs, every dollar she didn't spend on herself, to purchase medical equipment, pay for medications, rent clinic space, and provide healthcare services to people who had nowhere else to turn. She's essentially been running a full medical practice in secret, serving the most vulnerable members of our community while working as a cleaning lady to pay for your education." Dr. Mitchell spread dozens of thank you letters across his desk, each one written by families whose lives have been touched by my mother's secret medical work over the years. "Look at these," he said, his voice filled with reverence and admiration. "Children whose serious illnesses she diagnosed early, preventing life-threatening complications that other doctors might have missed. Elderly patients who couldn't afford their medications, she bought them with her own cleaning job wages. pregnant women who had no prenatal care. She provided it for free in her spare time between shifts. Your mother has been saving lives while you were building your legal career, using the medical skills she never lost to serve people who reminded her of your family's own struggles when you were young. She never stopped being a doctor, even when the world only saw her as a janitor. As I read letter after letter from grateful families, the full scope of my mother's hidden life began to emerge like pieces of a puzzle I never knew existed. A grandmother wrote about how my mother had stayed with her sick grandchild all night when the family couldn't afford hospital care, monitoring the child's condition and providing comfort during a medical crisis. A young father described how she had diagnosed his daughter's rare condition that other doctors had missed for months, potentially saving the child's life through early intervention. A mother of 3 thanked her for providing free medical care when her husband lost his job and their insurance, continuing to treat their family even when they couldn't pay a single dollar. These weren't just thank you notes. They were testimonies to a woman who had been quietly living as a saint while I was ashamed to call her my mother. Your mother became a pillar of this community in ways you can't imagine, Dr. Mitchell continued, showing me photographs of her working with local families at community events and health fairs. She was respected and loved by everyone in the poorest neighborhoods of our town, where people knew her true worth even if her own daughter didn't. They called her Dr. Margaret, even though she was officially working as a cleaning lady. Children would run to her on the street whenever they saw her. Families would invite her to their celebrations and important events. Elderly people would seek her advice on everything from serious medical issues to everyday life problems. She had built something beautiful and lasting here, a network of care and compassion that extended far beyond just medical treatment. She was the heart and soul of this community's support system, the person everyone turned to when they needed help. Please, I begged Dr. Mitchell, my voice breaking with desperation and guilt. Tell me where I can find her now. I have to apologize and tell her that I finally understand what she sacrificed for me, that I finally see her for the incredible woman she is. He hesitated for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to determine whether I was sincere or if I would just hurt her again. They slowly wrote down an address on a piece of paper. She moved to a rural clinic about 3 hours from here, in a small farming community that hasn't had a doctor in years. But Sarah, he said gently, his expression filled with concern and sadness, you should know that she's been struggling physically and emotionally. The stress of everything, the heartbreak from what happened between you two, the years of overwork and sacrifice, it's all taken a serious toll on her health. She's not the strong, resilient woman she used to be. I drove through the night to reach the remote farming community where my mother was reportedly working, my mind racing with everything I had learned and everything I needed to say to her. The rural clinic was located in a small, weathered building that looked like it had seen better days, surrounded by farmland and simple homes that spoke of a community that had very little money but probably great need for medical care. As I pulled up to the modest structure in the early morning hours, my heart was pounding with a mixture of hope, fear, and overwhelming guilt that felt like it might crush me. After years of separation, after the terrible things I'd said and done to the woman who loved me most, I was finally going to see my mother again. But I had no idea if she would even want to see me, or if she could ever forgive the daughter who had broken her heart so completely and publicly. The clinic was quiet when I entered, with only a few patients waiting in the small reception area that was clean but clearly operating on a tight budget. I approached the front desk with trembling hands and asked to see Dr. Margaret Thompson. The receptionist, a kind-looking older woman, looked at me curiously and pointed toward a small office at the end of the hallway. She's been working late again, the woman said with genuine concern in her voice. She never stops, that one, always putting everyone else's needs before her own, working herself to exhaustion to help folks who can't afford to pay her much of anything. As I walked down that narrow hallway, my hands were shaking uncontrollably and my heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. After all these years of separation and regret, I was about to face the woman I had wronged so deeply, so cruelly, so unforgivably. When I reached her office and looked through the partially open door, My heart broke completely and irrevocably. There was my mother, sitting alone at a small, cluttered desk, looking significantly older and more frail than I remembered from our last devastating encounter. She appeared to be sick, her skin pale and drawn, her movements slow and careful like someone dealing with chronic pain or illness. She was reviewing patient files even at this late hour, still working tirelessly to help others even though she clearly needed medical help herself. The years of sacrifice, heartbreak, and overwork had taken a visible and serious toll on her health. And seeing her like this, alone, sick, still serving others while neglecting herself, filled me with a guilt and regret so profound that I could barely breathe. This was the woman I had called a failure, and she was wasting away alone because of my cruelty and rejection. I knocked softly on the door frame and stepped hesitantly into her office, my voice trembling with emotion I could no longer control. "Mom," I said quietly, the word feeling foreign after years of silence between us. She looked up from her paperwork, and for a moment that felt like an eternity, neither of us moved or spoke. I could see the shock in her tired eyes, followed quickly by pain and what looked like fear that I'd come to hurt her again. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible and filled with confusion. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" The distance and caution in her voice was like a knife to my heart. This was my mother, the woman who used to light up whenever she saw me, who used to run to greet me with hugs and kisses, and now she was looking at me like I was a dangerous stranger who might hurt her again. "I think you should leave," my mother said quietly, deliberately turning away from me and focusing on her paperwork with forced concentration. "I'm sure you have important things to do, important people to see, a successful life to get back to. You made it very clear at your graduation that I don't belong in your world, that I'm an embarrassment to you." Her voice was steady but cold, and I could hear the years of pain, rejection, and carefully built protective walls in every carefully chosen word. She was protecting herself from the daughter who had already hurt her more than anyone else ever could. The daughter who had publicly humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. "Please, Mom," I started to say, my voice breaking with desperation, but she held up her hand to stop me from continuing. "I can't do this again, Sarah. I can't let you break my heart twice. I've finally found peace here, helping people who need me and appreciate what I do. Please just go back to your successful life and let me continue helping people here where I'm actually needed and wanted." I fell to my knees beside my mother's desk, no longer caring about my expensive suit or my dignity, only caring about the woman I had wounded so deeply. "Mom, please don't send me away," I begged, tears streaming down my face for the first time in years. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can never be fully healed. But I finally understand everything now. Dr. Mitchell told me the truth about who you really are, about what you gave up for me, about the incredible woman I was too blind and selfish to see." My voice broke completely as I continued. "You're not a failure, Mom. You're the most successful person I've ever known. You're a hero, and I've been the failure as a daughter, as a human being, as someone worthy of your love." My mother stopped pretending to read her paperwork and slowly turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain, confusion, and the faintest glimmer of hope. "You spoke to Dr. Mitchell?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "What did he tell you?" I could see her walls beginning to crack, just a little, could see the woman who had once loved me unconditionally, still buried somewhere beneath years of hurt and rejection. But I could also see the fear in her eyes, the fear that this was just another way I might hurt her, that I was only here because I needed something from her. "He told me everything," I whispered, "about Harvard Medical School, about your career as a pediatrician, about how you gave up everything to raise me, about the secret clinic you've been running to help families who can't afford health care. Mom, I thought you were a cleaning lady because that's all you were capable of." I continued, my voice shaking with shame and regret. "But you were a cleaning lady because that's what love looks like. You were a Harvard-trained doctor who chose to scrub floors so you could have flexible hours to be the mother you thought I needed. You gave up a brilliant career, financial security, professional recognition, everything you had worked for, because you loved me more than your own dreams. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, still protecting herself from further hurt. I've spent years building my legal career, thinking I was so successful, but you've been saving lives while I was saving rich people money. You've been a real hero while I was just playing dress up in expensive clothes, pretending to be someone I'm not. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she listened to me speak, and I could see decades of pain and loneliness beginning to surface. Sarah, she said softly, do you have any idea how long I've waited to hear you say something like that? How many nights I lay awake wondering if my daughter would ever see me as anything other than an embarrassment? Her voice was filled with years of accumulated hurt, but also with a love that had never really died despite everything I had done to kill it. When you called me a failure at your graduation, when you told me to disappear from your life, I thought my heart would never heal. I thought I'd lost you forever, that all my sacrifices had been for nothing because the daughter I loved so much was ashamed of everything I was. I was ashamed, but not of you. I was ashamed of myself, I said through my tears. I was ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of not having money, ashamed of being different from my wealthy classmates. But I was too immature and selfish to understand that you're the reason I had anything to be proud of at all. Without your sacrifices, without your love, without your strength, I would have had nothing. I built my entire identity around rejecting you. But in doing that, I rejected the best part of myself. I took a shaky breath and continued. These past few days, learning about your real life, seeing the impact you've had on so many families, reading the letters from people whose lives you've saved, it's shown me what real success looks like. And it looks like you, Mom. It's always looked like you. My mother slowly reached out her hand toward me, then hesitated, as if she was afraid this moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. I never stopped loving you, Sarah, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Even when you hurt me so deeply, even when you said those terrible things, even when you made it clear you didn't want me in your life, I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to reach you anymore. I didn't know how to be the mother you needed when everything about me seemed to embarrass you. She paused, studying my face as if trying to determine whether my remorse was real. But Sarah, love isn't enough to heal some wounds. Trust has to be rebuilt. Respect has to be earned again. I can't just pretend that years of rejection and pain didn't happen because you finally realized what I gave up for you. I know I can't undo the past, I said, finally taking her hand in mine and feeling the rough, work-worn skin that told the story of her sacrifices. I know I can't take back the cruel words or erase the pain I caused you. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, trying to be the daughter you deserved all along. I want to help you with your work here, use my legal skills to support the families you're serving, maybe even help you expand the clinic or secure funding for better equipment. I looked into her eyes with all the sincerity I could muster. I don't want to go back to my empty, selfish life in Boston. I want to stay here with you, learn from you, help you serve people who really need us. I want to honor the legacy you've built instead of running away from it. My mother looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of insincerity or hidden motives. Slowly, gradually, I could see her beginning to believe that my change of heart was real, that the daughter she had raised with so much love was finally emerging from beneath years of shame and selfishness. You would really want to stay here? She asked quietly. In this poor farming community, helping people who can't pay very much, working in a clinic that's nothing like the prestigious law firms you're used to? I nodded emphatically, and for the first time since I had entered her office, I saw a small smile begin to form on her lips. Yes, Mom. I want to be where you are. I want to learn what real service looks like. I want to be part of something that actually matters. My mother slowly stood up from her chair, and I rose to meet her. For a moment, we just looked at each other, the mother who had sacrificed everything and the daughter who had finally learned to appreciate it. Then, slowly, carefully, she opened her arms to me. I stepped forward and felt her embrace for the first time in years, felt the unconditional love that had never really gone away despite all the pain I had caused. We held each other and cried, for the years we had lost, for the pain we had both endured, for the love that had survived despite everything. "I forgive you, Sarah," she whispered into my hair. "I forgive you, and I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming. It just took you a little longer to find your way home." 6 months later, I was working alongside my mother in the rural clinic, using my legal expertise to help families navigate insurance problems, disability claims, and medical debt issues while she provided the medical care they desperately needed. We had created something beautiful together, a combination of legal and medical services that was transforming the lives of everyone in the community. I had left my prestigious law firm and my empty luxury apartment to live in a small house near the clinic, and I had never been happier or more fulfilled. Every day, I watched my mother save lives and restore hope, and I finally understood what success really meant. It wasn't about money or status or impressing wealthy friends. It was about using your gifts to serve others, about love that sacrifices everything for the people who matter most. My mother had taught me that lesson through her example, and now we were living it together, healing the world one family at a time, while our own relationship continued to heal and grow stronger with each passing day. I had found my way home to the woman who had always been my hero, and together we were writing a new chapter of love, service, and redemption that would honor everything she had sacrificed to make possible. What did you think of this incredible story of love and redemption? I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of unconditional love, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more amazing stories that celebrate the heroes in our everyday lives.